There was once a time when an entire people groaned under the weight of oppression. They longed for freedom, for hope, for deliverance. And so a child was born, a child who would change the course of history. This is the story of Moses. In the land of Egypt, the Israelites, once welcomed as guests, had grown numerous, and Pharaoh, fearing their numbers, decreed that all newborn Hebrew boys must be cast into the Nile. It was a time of fear, yet in the midst of darkness, a mother's love shone brightly. A Hebrew woman named Jochebed gave birth to a son, a beautiful, healthy child. But to keep him meant certain death. So, with trembling hands, she wove a basket, lined it with tar and pitch, and placed her infant son inside. With silent prayers, she set the basket afloat on the waters of the Nile, entrusting his fate to the hands of the Almighty. But this was no ordinary child. As the basket drifted along the river's gentle currents, the daughter of Pharaoh, bathing nearby, saw it and was filled with compassion. She took the child as her own and named him Moses, meaning drawn out of the water. Little did she know, this child was born for a greater purpose, one that would shake the very foundations of Egypt. Moses grew up surrounded by wealth, luxury, and the finest education. He walked the golden halls of Pharaoh's palace, dressed in royal garments, trained in leadership, war, and philosophy. To all, he was a prince of Egypt, but deep inside, something stirred within him. Though raised among rulers, he never forgot his roots. He saw the burdens his people carried, the toil, the labor, the longing for freedom, and it weighed on him. He was caught between two worlds, one of privilege, the other of suffering. One day, Moses made a choice that would change everything. Seeing an Egyptian taskmaster mistreating a fellow Hebrew, he intervened. Fearful of the consequences, Moses fled Egypt and journeyed into the wilderness, leaving behind the only life he had ever known. Moses wandered far and wide until he reached the land of Midian. There, he found refuge, married Zipporah, and became a shepherd. Years passed, and he thought his days of leadership were long behind him. But God had other plans. One day, as Moses led his flock through the mountains, he saw something extraordinary, a bush engulfed in flames, yet it did not burn. As he stepped closer, a voice called his name. Moses! Moses! He froze. This was no ordinary fire. It was the presence of the Almighty. God spoke, revealing his plan. Moses was to return to Egypt and demand Pharaoh to release the Israelites from bondage. Moses trembled. "Who am I to stand before Pharaoh?" he asked. But God answered, "I will be with you." Even then Moses doubted, but the Lord gave him signs, his staff turning into a serpent, his hand momentarily afflicted and then restored. And at last, with faith in his heart, Moses set out to fulfill his divine mission. Moses returned to Egypt and stood before Pharaoh, his brother of the past, but now a ruler set against him. "Let my people go," Moses declared, his voice unwavering. Pharaoh laughed, refusing. And so the plagues began. The Nile turned to blood. Swarms of locusts devoured the land. Darkness swallowed the sky for days. Still, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. But the final plague changed everything, the death of the firstborn. That night, the Israelites marked their doors with lamb's blood, and the angel of death passed over them. The cries of Egypt filled the night, and at last Pharaoh relented. "Go," he commanded, "take your people and leave." And so, under the leadership of Moses, thousands of Israelites set forth, leaving behind centuries of oppression. They marched toward freedom, toward the land promised to their ancestors. But Pharaoh's heart hardened once more, and he sent his army to pursue them. The Israelites found themselves trapped. Before them, the Red Sea, Behind them, the mighty Egyptian chariots. Fear gripped their hearts, but Moses stood firm. "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." He raised his staff over the waters, and in that moment the sea split in two. Walls of water rose on either side, and a dry path appeared before them. The Israelites crossed, step by step, in awe of the miracle before them. As the last of them reached the shore, the Egyptian army surged forward, but with a mighty crash, the waters collapsed, swallowing them whole. Freedom. At last, freedom. The Israelites would wander the wilderness for 40 years, learning, growing, and drawing closer to God. Moses led them, guiding them through trials, receiving the 10 Commandments, and teaching them the ways of the Lord. Though Moses himself would not enter the Promised Land, he left behind a people transformed, a people who had once been bound, now free. Moses' story is one of courage, faith, and divine purpose. It is a reminder that no matter how lost we feel, no matter how impossible the journey ahead may seem, there is always a greater plan at work. Just as God called Moses, He calls each of us to step into the unknown, to trust, and to move forward with faith. So when the road seems uncertain, when obstacles rise before you like an impassable sea, remember, miracles happen when we walk in faith. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more faith-based content. See you in the next story of faith and triumph.